Welcome to Tuesday Group, the best day of the week here in Ely, Tuesday, where we all come together and learn something new. I remember the last Loon presentation very vividly. It was one of my favorites. Didn't know anything about loons really until Sherry came in and talked all about them. And then I got very excited about loons after that. So I'm excited to see what I will learn this week as we learn more. Our presenter is Steve Maanum, who's talking about answering the call of the loon. He grew up in Minnesota, and I just recently saw a loon at a young age and decided that he's going to come back and learn more about these amazing animals and has started can't get my words out, has started photographing them over the course of his life, and is going to present wonderful pictures and a particular program on one lake that is helping support the loon populations and the water levels there. And he also was a former teacher and is still involved with children's education today as part of the Young Authors Program, helping students use pictures as their inspiration for the stories they write. I'm very excited to learn more about loons, and I am excited to have all of you here having lunch and learning community with me. And so without further ado, here is Steve Maanum.
There we are. All right. As I get going here, I just want to show you just a few pictures before we start with the actual presentation, just to kind of get us in the mood for this. When I left Park Rapids yesterday, which I used to think was northern Minnesota, after coming up here yesterday, and I've been to Ely before, but all of a sudden now I'm thinking that Park Rapids is southern Minnesota. But we have loons back, and we were putting out many of our nesting platforms yesterday while I was driving up here, so I missed out on it, and I heard about that because of it. But I was trying to usher the loons up this way with me, and I don't know if it worked or not. I was surprised to see that, you know, you're still solid here, and a lot of our larger lakes are still solid too. But I'll be talking about Mantrap, and this isn't going to, it should be on a 4-second thing, but I'll just move through quickly. Just a few of the pictures that were taken on Mantrap. Three on the back there. And okay. And as we get started here, I'll be talking mainly about this one loon management project, which began back in the 1980s. This couple right here, Warren and Arliss, are still actively involved with it. But back in the 1980s, when I was a young pup and my hair was a different color, I got to know them a little bit, but with my teaching duties each spring and the coaching that I did, I wasn't able to really join them as a loon volunteer on that lake until I retired in 2007. I'm the only volunteer that doesn't live on the lake, but they accepted me anyway for some reason. And so what they noticed back in the 1980s is that when loons would nest close to shore or on shore, they were losing their eggs. And some of this is going to be old information for you, I know, because Sherry has gone over this stuff many times. But one of the culprits certainly was a raccoon. Skunks, mink, fox, crows, and seagulls, too. A lot of different animals take the eggs. But they wanted to try to remedy that somehow, so they asked one simple little question: what can we do? So what they did is they built a big, heavy, bulky log raft, and they floated it out from their lake shore, put it out from shore. Loons took it, and they were successful. Well, after a year or two of trying to float this big, bulky, heavy log raft out, they switched the design to PVC, which a lot of rafts are now being made out of. It was much easier to put out, and again, the loons found it met their needs. Well, in about 1989, Lyle Lasky, who had a cabin on the lake and then built a year-round home on the lake, he had been an art instructor at Morehead State University. And he was certainly interested in loons also. So he dealt with Warren and Arliss, and what a lot of his background in his artwork was put into the designs of the rafts. So he was very meticulous. I mean, he would draw these things out, and he was never content with one design. He was always trying to make changes to make it better. So his drawings and 3D models would be started, and then the rafts would be made. And this was one of his first designs. It was triangular with round pontoons, and all of the rafts have a ramp so that the loons could get up on it. And you can see that this loon is making use of it. This one has a canopy over it as well. Well, right now, many years later, we have pretty much gone with just two different designs that we use now. A type A raft, full aluminum, still has the ramp, and pontoons are rectangular. They're bigger pontoons, and these are used out in the areas of the lake that might be susceptible to wind and waves. And this one has the framework for a canopy, but these canopies are removable. If you can see the design on here, that can flip up, and we'll see that in a minute. This is the type B raft, a much lower profile raft. We're using those in areas of the lake that are protected from the wind and waves. They don't need a ramp because they're low enough in the water where the loons can just come and go as they want. What is now with these rafts, we have no wood on them at all. And that was one of the design changes that Lyle made over the years, because the ones that had plywood on them, after a number of years, that plywood would have to be replaced. So he kept thinking, we need a very low maintenance raft. So what we would do each year is we would have a couple new ones made. We would sell off some of the old ones. So other lake associations probably would buy those, maybe redo them if they had to, and they would put them out. Okay, as Loon volunteers, we break our duties into three different categories: the pre-nesting duties, the nesting duties, and the post-nesting duties. In the pre-nesting, well, the spring raft preparation. That was done on Saturday. We make use of 20 rafts on the lake, and we cut all the grasses, the natural vegetation from the lake right after the ice goes on the lake in early December, before snow gets too deep out there. We're out there, and we have the permission of DNR on that to be doing that. So we also then distribute the rafts, which, like I said, some were distributed yesterday. The larger part of the lake still had ice on it. So when I get home tonight, tomorrow morning at dawn, I'll be out on Mantrap, and for the first hour, I'll be sitting in a photo blind trying to get waterfowl pictures along the shoreline. But then we'll hop in the loon boat, and we'll put the rest of the rafts out if the lake is free of ice. We do, we're always looking at daily behavior and then schedule loon counts. We'll do 3 loon counts. We'll do one in May before nesting actually begins. We want to know how many adult loons are back on the lake. Now, sometimes loons are on the lake that might be going other places for their nesting. We've had as many as 79 loons counted in May. And for a lake that's under 2,000 acres, I think we're at about 1,700 acres. That's a lot of loons. And that not all of them, as I said, stay, but we normally have, when we do our July and August count, we typically have about 54 adult loons on the lake. So you see our duties, and it starts then with the raft preparation. And that's always a fun time to get together. And you can see here the nesting rings we use. Now, we've somehow trained these loons to nest in that thing. And so all the grasses are put underneath it. They're zip tied down. And most of the time, the loons are educated enough to lay their eggs inside of that. Once in a while, they don't in that. But you can also see, again, the framework that's here. And there one is with the cage on it. This one actually is a type A raft. It has the canopy going over the top, so a loon could actually get out the front or the back if it had to. You also see where we hook on our ropes and our anchors. We use a 2-anchor system, so the raft is not floating around or moving, and that we tighten those up. You see a number on the raft. We have these registered with the Sheriff's Department, and as well as reflectors, because if they're out in public water areas, we have to make sure that the boats can see them and stay away from them. Okay, here we are getting some of the natural grasses. And that's one of the things we stress. Some people have put out a raft and they've put straw on them. Straw and hay, things like that, will have a type of fungus in them that may cause upper respiratory problems with loons. So we always use natural bedding. And here's the type B raft. We try to connect this with younger people too, and getting them involved because I'm 75. You know, and the person I'm with, Barry, that we do most of the work in the boat, he's 80. What's going to happen when we're gone? You know, we want to make sure that this continues. So we try to involve younger ones too. Okay, so that's what all the rafts look like when they're prepared and just waiting for ice out. And as we said yesterday, a bunch of them went out. Now, Arliss makes this whiteboard each year with all the information we need. Where it's going to go, if it's a type A or type B raft, the size of the anchors on it. In this case, 228 pounders, because that's out where there is some wind. You see some other ones have smaller anchors, 20 to 15, and so on. So that's kind of our cue as to how to do them correctly. And here are three of the ladies that are volunteers. Normally on the boat that we use, we can put 2 of the type A rafts on and take out at a time. Here you see one in place. You also see once they start nesting, we use the buoys that say nesting area, please stay out. We're hoping that people pay attention to that. But again, on this lake, enough of the people on the lake are aware of the project that they're always watching too. And that and if someone's out there close, they're letting people know. On this one too, if you can see it, there's a camera. And I will be talking about that just in a little bit here. Okay, here's Lyle with his boat. That's a 16 or 16 and a half, kind of a modified John boat that we use. And when Lyle in about 2014, he decided to get a new boat for fishing. He donated this boat to the Loon project. And that's it on the lake. None of our funding for the Loon project comes from the memberships of people on the lake. There are more important things, you know, like the invasive species and things like that, that they're always dealing with. So all we do is with donations. And that's so whenever we need something, like a few years ago, the motor on the Loon boat clonked out. So we had to get a new motor, and right away, donations came in, and it was no problem. So Lyle donated this. Now, when he did, Barry and I put our creative heads together. We thought, we've got to come up with a really good, fancy name for this boat so that when we're out there by the rafts and that, and people see us out there, you know, they'll know what we're doing. So he and I got together, we threw around some ideas, and we came up with Loon boat. You see at our age, some of our creativity is gone, but it serves the purpose. So there's Barry, and we keep the boat. He lives on the lake, so we keep the boat right at his dock. He's the one who gets stuck winterizing it and getting it ready in the spring. I just drive up from town and say, are we ready to go? You know, so once the loons start coming back, even when the ice is not out yet, if it's open along the shorelines, we'll be seeing loons. Last week, his bay that he lives in, appropriately is called Loon Bay, and the ice was out from the shore. So I was sitting in a blind, a photo blind, with wood ducks and mergansers and things along the shoreline. And I was hearing loons flying over. And actually, as it started, the bay started opening up out in the middle, there was a pair. And typically, research will say the males come back first. But the 2 that were there, we're pretty sure, we have no way of really knowing until they start nesting. But we do think it was the resident male and female. Because when another loon flew over, they definitely, that male was letting them know, this is our territory, you know, you go find your own. So the males can be seen swimming together, actually, not being aggressive with each other until the females come back. That's when things change. So here you end up seeing a threesome. And what happens there is we've got a resident male and female and an intruder that decides, I kind of like the looks of that female. Maybe she'll go for me. I'm a little bit younger. Well, typically what happens is there'll be a standoff. Now, if you see the red on this one, I can't prove it, but I'm thinking that was a beak that stabbed him. And we've got blood right there. And you can see they start with the aggressive pose, standing up, showing how big I am. And then a little bit of this kind of stuff, a little chase. And the lighting was real bad here. I apologize for the photo. But they will fight, and sometimes to the death, actually. But most of the time, the stronger one wins out, and the weaker one ends up taking off. Like, here's the, and this can go on for many minutes as they're chasing each other around the lake. So we've just got a few seconds there. And this time the resident male won, and the intruder decided to go elsewhere. Now, if you watch them run across the water, it's kind of fun. It's kind of hard to focus on too. But they're different than a mallard, where with most birds, you know, they've got hollow bones. A mallard can flap those wings and straight up it goes. Well, the loon with the solid or almost solid bones is still running and still running and still running. And finally, it takes flight. At that point, when the territory dispute is settled, the pair look at each other and say, well, honey, here we go. And the courtship begins. So with the courtship, it's nothing real fancy. There's some head rubbing and bobbing and diving together and stretching together. And then it's onto the nest building. And here one is pulling up a bunch of the muck from the bottom and putting it on the nest. And both adults will help make that nest. And I've been able to photograph sometimes, well, you'll see here, is this one is putting stuff up on the nest. Then it left and the mate came up. And the first thing the mate did is remove some of the stuff that one had put there and put it in a different area. So yeah, I thought about when I'm trying to clean the house and my wife looks at me too, and okay, she wants it over there instead of here. So I understand this. Okay, and once the nest site is selected, they both actually will sit on it even before any eggs are laid. They take their turn sitting on it and say, yeah, okay, this will work. This is fine. And where they choose that nesting site. Research says typically the male will choose the nesting site. Sherry and I talked about this last night. We think sometimes the females are pretty strong and have something to say about it too. But sometimes a good nesting site is chosen. Here you can see how the grasses are going to be growing up around that and hiding that loon from predators. And same with this. And you can see one egg on that nest. And here I questioned this one. I thought, what in the world? But if you've ever been around a bunch of white pelicans and smell them, maybe this is real good protection from predators, because what predator is going to want to come around that smell and that? And so a little natural nest right there. Now this on the end of a point, not a good site. Wave action, winds from both directions, and fluctuating water levels can definitely affect that nest. And this one too, on the end of a peninsula, right down there. And when the loon left, the seagull was right there watching, and that's what was left. So had a meal. That loon, year after year, nested on that peninsula and lost eggs. We thought, you dummy, you know, why can't you learn something? You'll see her coming up again here in a minute. Here's one of the type B rafts with a canopy opening on both ends. And again, you can see the camera mounted. Okay, again, a type B raft out in a shallow, very protected area. Type A raft with the loon sitting in it with a full canopy. Just because we put a raft out doesn't mean they're going to take it. And that's one thing that Sherry and I talked about last night too. Some lakes might think that, well, all I have to do is put out a bunch of rafts and we're going to get more loons. What we have done on Mantrap is there is some rhyme and reason to what we do. If a natural nest has failed more than once, then we introduce a raft to that area to give them an alternative. Sometimes they choose to use it, sometimes they don't. Here again, you can see the actual natural nest in the background. Here's a raft just waiting, you know. This is what the lake looks like. About 1,770 acres. And it's a neat lake. It's not Ely area, but it almost is like a boundary waters lake. Because, well, first of all, it has so much habitat for the loons, fish, yes, and a lot of private land, privately owned land. Boy Scouts own a bunch of it. Their camp is not on that lake. It's on a lake right next to it, but they own property on it, but they just haven't developed it. Also, big corporation, 3M, owned about 7 miles of the lake shore and about 700 acres of the woodlands there too. So that was undeveloped and is staying undeveloped. So that helps a lot. And then with all the bays and stuff again, it gives what we've identified as 24 nesting areas. In some years, we will have 24 nests. So last year, I think we had 23. And one year we had only 20, I think, but it's grown up to that. We're back in the 80s, there were not that many nests. So territories have been taken over and have been made use of. Okay, this is what the lake looks like in a drawing that I did, and where we put all of our rafts and where the natural nests are. So with all the areas, now yesterday when they put out rafts, they were able to put them out in that area of the lake, but this bigger part of the lake still had ice on it. So Wednesday morning, tomorrow, we'll be putting the rest of the rafts out, hopefully. And that. So on that year, that was a few years ago, we had 24 nests. ANPs, artificial nesting platforms, 18 were used out of the 20, and 6 natural nests. Okay, copulation occurs. Again, old research says, and I've read 2 different accounts, some researchers say the male will go up to shore away from the nesting site, and the male will call the female up, and they'll copulate. Other researchers say the female goes up away from the nest on shore, and she'll call the male, and he comes. We're seeing it happen right on the nesting site, whether it's a natural nest, whether it's one of our rafts. We're copulating right on them, even with a full canopy and that. So there's what the eggs look like. Most of you are aware of that. But when we do our egg counts, and it's important that we do this each spring before predators start getting to the eggs, we want to have an actual and accurate egg count. So what we do is we have to visit each nesting site. Now, we do that in a very, very respectful and careful way, where when we come up with a boat, we never come up fast, we never come directly at it, and we never block the entrance in case a loon wanted to leave. But in most cases, what we'll do is we see 3 different behaviors. One is, you can see the loon sitting right there while Lyle's holding onto the raft, and there it is. It's not showing any signs of stress whatsoever. If we get lucky with behavior number 1, it just raises up, we count the eggs, we say thank you very much, and we back away and let them go on with their duties. All right? A second behavior might be, as we're moving in slowly and carefully, the loon might leave the nest, whether it's a natural nest or a raft. This was a type B raft. And what we do is we get the egg count, we back away, and we sit out waiting for one of the 2 adults to get back on the eggs so that we're not, causing any problems. The third behavior that we see will be a look of annoyance. Now, when that happens, we don't push the issue. Judith McIntyre, who was one of the first real loon researchers, she had stories of where she would just put her hand underneath the loon and lift it up to count the eggs. We don't do that. What we do is, if they're sitting that tight, we just say, excuse us, we back away. And on our chart, we'll mark down 1 egg with a question mark. We figure if they're sitting that tight, there's got to be an egg there. But there could be a second egg, and we're just hoping that at a future date, we'll be able to count that maybe when she's gone or he's gone. We moved into a natural nest one day. Lyle was running his boat, I was up front, and I was doing the egg count. And this loon on a natural nest raised up, and I could see 1 egg. So I said, Lyle, we've got an egg. He said, okay, and he started backing away, and I said, wait a minute. He said, what? I said, she's acting strange. She would raise up, lower, raise up. I said, I think she's going to lay her second egg while we're right here. And sure enough, while we sat right there, front row seat, she said, I've got a job to do, and I'm doing it whether you're here or not. And I think my camera was almost smoking. I was going so fast. I mean, boom, 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 boom. And I should have been taking video. We do have video of eggs being laid with our other cameras. But this was pretty neat to be able to get that. And she accepted us. It was no problem. So once she laid the egg, we backed away again, always thanking her, and she went about her duties. So the incubation, you'll see or hear different numbers, 27, 29 days. So really about 4 weeks is what they're doing. And it seems like it would be a very boring time for them, but there's a lot happening during that time. They'll be rolling the eggs. They'll be switching places. And the one that leaves will go out and maybe preen, straighten their feathers, oil them and stuff. And maybe scratching a little bit here too. Sometimes getting rid of black flies doing that. Doing a little stretching and a little bit of eating. And when that one came up in front of me with a northern in its mouth, I thought, that's one hungry loon. And sure enough, it tipped it head first and down it went. And I thought, whoa. So, but did you see the little salad that was with it too? That's a balanced meal, you know? All right, and they take a little nest or rest while they're gone too. Here's a look at one of the charts that we kind of keep. The data collecting that we do, we'll mark down the locations. AC means a type A raft with a canopy, just a type A raft, no canopy. What we do with the canopies, if loons are not used to an artificial platform, usually the first year we introduce a raft without a canopy on it, so they don't feel so enclosed. But once they accept a raft, then we'll add maybe a partial canopy and then a full canopy. And you can see the dates there too of the nesting date, how many eggs there are, any additional eggs. Sometimes we'll lose an egg or two for predators. They might re-nest. We want to mark that down as well. And then we kind of always anticipate the hatching date. We could be off by a day or two, but it's kind of nice to know those things as well. Okay, nest disturbances during the incubation. Now, we know that both adults incubate the eggs. And with our remote cameras, we can find out exactly how long one sits before it switches off. But I like to find those things out for myself. So one day I chose a nest and I sat there and got used to this loon. I mean, we talked back and forth. You know, she accepted me. We even told some jokes back and forth. I told a joke and she got a kick out of it. But at one point, all of a sudden, she dropped down. A first sign of something's wrong. And at first I thought, well, what did I say? What did I do? But it wasn't me. It was this merganser with her new ducklings swimming too close to this hidden nest. Loons are very territorial. And the one on the nest somehow let out word to her mate. And there he came, underwater and swimming right toward the merganser. And he exploded right next to the mother. And two things are happening in this picture, which I thought was kind of neat. He's protecting the loon nest from her, but she's protecting her ducklings from him. You ever see like a killdeer or a robin play like they have a broken wing to pull you away from the nesting site or something? That's exactly what she's doing. She is risking her life so that her ducklings, you know, can be safe. And they were scooting around the other way. Well, at this point, and that loon was certainly big enough to kill that merganser. But on that particular day, the merganser was lucky. All that loon wanted to do is give a warning and say, hey, back off. And she did. So then he's over saying, honey, you could always count on me. I took care of you. And then she says, well, fine. Then I'm out of here. You take your turn on the eggs. It was 6.5 hours I sat there waiting for him to take his turn. And as awkward as they are on land, you can see yeah, it's kind of a chore. But finally, he took his turn. All right. Now, this wood duck wasn't quite as lucky as the merganser. She decided to rest on one of the loon rafts with one of her ducklings. The next morning when we went out, this is all we found. Loon killed that duckling. And loons have been on record of killing ducklings and things, for years. So that made this next picture a little bit rare. Here's a family of loons that adopted a mallard duckling. And it's back in the 1980s when I was still shooting film and that, so it's not real clear. But here's the mallard. The two loons, it's like they're looking at each other saying, it's not my side of the family, And there's the duckling riding on the back, while the poor little loons are going, hey, when's it our turn? What are we, chopped liver? So, all right. We started in 2008 using technology. We knew we couldn't be on the water as much as we wanted to be, and especially at night. We're curious. I'm an old teacher. What happens when we're not there? We wanted to find out. So that's when we started using our basic trail cameras. And you can see it's mounted right here on the Type B raft. That's how close it is. Now, with the problem with the Type or that kind of a trail camera is it's got an SD card in it. We have to change those SD cards and batteries. That means we have to be that close to the nesting loons when we do that. Here's Lyle putting down our first trail camera back in 2008. He just stuck it in the ground in the muck right by a nest. You can see one egg and you can see the camera. And here was that loon, that same one that we saw where the seagull ate the eggs on that same peninsula. Here she is, and guess what happened? Family of raccoons that night came marching right out and ate it. Now, we've tried to educate that female. In fact, one spring, what we did about 4 or 5 years ago, we put one of those Type B, those flat rafts, we put it right on the rocks on the end of that peninsula. And she nested on it. So when she started nesting, we pulled in with the boat. I grabbed an anchor rope and we started dragging her out into the lake. And she just sat there watching us. And we anchored her out away from shore. She hatched the eggs that year. But this is what was left after those raccoons came in. Okay, so here I am, yeah, you don't have to look at that side, but mounting a camera right by a nest. And again, you see the loon is not putting up any kind of a fuss. They've learned to accept us on this. I think what they do is they just roll their eyes. We're coming, oh, here he is again, So, or here, holding right onto the framework on the Type B raft. The loon is sitting right there. The camera is right down here where I'm changing an SD card. During the times that we're not there, it's interesting with these trail cameras to find out how many other things visit a nesting site. Here is a natural nest site that's been used for years, and here are the loons on it, but there's a muskrat on it, if you can see it. There's a mallard on it. Oh, pelicans swimming around it. Oh, a goose decided to stand on it. Oh, the loons are back. Oh, here's a wood duck on it, and a mallard and a teal back there or here, and a wood duck. A crow decided to visit, but there were no eggs there left or yet. A swan, a great blue heron, and finally, the loons populate, and the eggs began to, take over. So the loons did nest on that site. But those are all the different things that visit a nesting site that we weren't aware of until we started using cameras. Okay, we can see them switching places, and we can actually monitor and find out how many hours between for each pair. We see leg bands on these, and toward the end, I'll be talking a little bit about Kevin Kino's work and how he came and banded those. We're out on the water no matter what the temperature is. One day in 2017, it was 78 degrees on April 22nd, which is today. The next day, 31 degrees. Snow. We had to shovel the loon boat out, before we could go out. And on the nests too. There we are. And this one, I'm not going to show much of it, but they're still sitting on the nest with snow all around. Okay, the black flies become a real problem during the nesting season. Some years worse than others, but you can see them on the head there. And yeah, trying to scratch them off. Little video to show how thick they are. Sometimes it's so annoying that a loon will actually abandon its nest just to get relief. But see again, what these cameras are able to capture for us. Okay, we are able to monitor different types of behavior. Here was a nest that had 5 mallard eggs in it. and the 2 loon eggs. The loons were incubating all of them. So that was really neat to see. Here's a great blue heron visiting a log raft. All the pelicans swimming around. That's where the nesting site is on that raft. Muskrats don't seem to be a threat as far as taking eggs or anything. They just come up there to sometimes steal some of the nesting material, and the loons seem to tolerate them. But here at night, a beaver decided to climb up on that log raft and just rest itself and kind of straighten its fur. Well, when the loon came back, let's see, is that one gonna, oh, that one wasn't gonna work. Shoot. Oh, well, that's okay. The loon flared up and that beaver took off in a hurry. So it didn't come back. Here was a crow that found a nest and took the eggs. Here's a mink that found one of the rafts, actually. The rafts have really helped with our success rate, but we're still finding that some animals are able to get out to them. And the eggs were too big for the mink to put in its mouth, but it rolled it off into the lake. And the other egg was left there, and it hatched about 9 days later. Here we can see, watch from behind, as this loon is flaring up at what? You see it coming? This is a natural nest site. And a raccoon came in, and that loon said, no way, not tonight. And so it defended its nest. Okay, until 2021, when people would say, do eagles take eggs? We always said, we know they take chicks, but we've never documented them taking the eggs. In 2021, we documented it. And we've got otters on the lake. And, you know, at first I thought, okay, they're taking the eggs, but more of what they're doing is they're using the rafts as their kitchen table. They're catching bullheads at night and coming up on the rafts and eating the bullheads, which on 2 of our rafts last year, the loons then abandoned the rafts, you know, with their eggs there. One of those pair of loons came back 10 days later and started sitting on those eggs again. And those eggs weren't going to hatch, but that's what they did. We have now gone to the cellular trail cameras. What's nice about those is they send the pictures right back to your phone. There's no more going up to the rafts, changing SD cards. And this one has a solar collector on it as well. So that gives our batteries a lot more, you know, longevity. Here are the otters that I was talking about. They're up on one of the rafts, and you can see the eggs are there. They didn't bother the eggs, but they were eating their bullheads. Here, Sherry and I talked about this last night. A month or 2 ago, I sent Sherry a 24.5-minute video that I had done of pretty much of what this program includes, but all in video and stills, and a longer segment of this. But can you see on the back of this loon, there's a mink hanging on. This went on for minutes. And the eggs disappeared. The loon was not killed, but it sure had bite marks. It looked pretty rough the next morning. Okay, so if the loons have made it through the black flies, through the cold, through you know, late snows and all the other predators and everything else, you know, they're finally going to hatch. And on hatching day, mainly at that point, our raft project is done once they leave the nest, because when the chicks are out on the lake, it doesn't matter whether they came from a natural nest or a raft. Now they're all exposed to the exact same dangers in that. But here's one hatching right from on the raft. And here's one. I was sitting at this nest. It was Smithsonian that came in 2019 to film. And the videographer was flying in from like Vermont or somewhere out east. He was flying in the day that this was taking place. So I was out there filming this, and I thought, oh, why isn't he here? So when he got to town later in that day, I drove him out to the lake, and I said, well, this is the nest that just hatched today that you missed. And I told Sherry last night, I said, fortunately enough, there was a storm that night. And the storm forced the family of loons back up on the nest, So the next morning he was there and he was able to get all the footage that he wanted of the chicks and the adults on the nest, of one of the adults coming in with a fish to feed the chicks. And, you know, he had a great time with that. But, you know, because the eggs are not laid the same day, typically they're not going to hatch the same day either. So while one is sitting there waiting for the other egg to hatch, it just kind of gets some private time with mom and dad, playing around, taking its first little swim. Now, here's what we do at the end of the nesting season. We keep track. The red would be the natural nests, the blue, the rafts. And I think better than a graph, let's look at the numbers. From 2012 to 2023, we monitored 258 nests on this one lake. All right, year after year. 180 of those were on rafts, 78 were on natural nests. Okay, 501 eggs were laid. And again, you see the breakdown of how many of those eggs, 349 on the rafts, 152 on natural nests. You see how many chicks were hatched. Again, 245 on the rafts, only 71 on the natural nests. And then you also see at the bottom, you know, a little bit of the calculations we have done too. And that's so on the rafts, a 70.2 hatching rate over the course of those years. And on the natural nest, a 46.7%. So certainly the rafts have helped our success rate. Okay, here again is the breakdown of each year. The lowest year we had, well, in 2021, only 46% of our chicks hatched. Yeah, from the eggs made it. So, but you see again here, the 438 eggs, 63.2% hatching success, which is above the state average on that by quite a bit, I think. Okay, we do observations beyond the nesting. So once they've hatched and left the natural nest or the raft, we're still monitoring things. And here's while that one is waiting for the second one to hatch, you know, it's just playing around again on the nest. The other adult came in with a fish and fed it and that too. But so we're filming things like that. Certainly the riding on the back, riding for 3 reasons. One, because they get tired. They might get cold, so warmth, but also for protection. So it might be climbing up. Even this chick's getting a little bigger, still climbing on. And it might be 2, or it might be 3, very rarely. Here again for our July count. In July, we're counting the adults and the chicks. In May, when we count loons, it's only the adults because there aren't any chicks yet. Okay, a little bit of the feeding. When they are young, the food source is small. Okay, and as the chick grows and they grow fast, then the food source gets a little bigger as well. Okay, when this adult came in with that sun, I thought, no way. Look at that. Look at how they open up their throat and that thing slides down head first. I think the adult was even a little amazed, you know, kind of like, whoa, no? When it came up with a crayfish, those chicks said, I'm not ready for that yet. So they were kind of looking, going, nope, nope. Now, all this while, the adults are paying attention to those predators and those dangers. So the look above is looking at this or watching that come down and hopefully not taking the chicks. Also looking below. Now, they might be looking for food sources, but they're also looking for danger, which could be in the form of a northern or a muskie or a snapping turtle from below. So a lot of chicks disappear. Sometimes the human interference. And I'm not here to blame any fisherman or anything else, but the tangled fish line. I don't know that a fisherman would on purpose throw it out into the water, but even if it was in the bottom of the boat, when the boat takes off, the wind could blow that out of the bottom of the boat. And sometimes it has this effect. Or a steel leader and a big plug wrapped around that one. And again, I'm not saying a fisherman would cast toward a loon on purpose, but loons are curious. When you're out fishing, sometimes they're right by the boat in that. So it's you know, it happens where a loon gets caught also. Sometimes we see deformities, as in human beings, animals, wildlife. Not everything's perfect also. See how that beak is bent over? I thought, how in the world is that thing going to feed itself? And when I was out there that day, the adults were feeding it. But then I thought, now wait a minute, in the fall, typically the adults migrate first. If this is left behind to fend for itself, will it be able to feed itself? No? Okay. This one, we have no idea. Look at that bald spot. Whether it got hit by the prop of a motor or whether it was a fight with another loon, I have no idea. But this was a couple years ago, and last year in a different part of the lake, we saw it happen again. This is a different loon, and yet the same thing, that bald spot. Okay, the quick growth, and Sherry is showing this too in her presentations. Here's a day or two after hatching. You can still see how the beak is hooked there for breaking out of the shell. A few weeks later, they've grown. A month later, look at what they look like. Now, in August, you can see the size of the juvenile, which is now what a chick is called, and you start seeing the changing of the color on the adults as they lose their breeding plumage. It starts around the mouth and on the head. You can see it there as it's disappearing. And finally, they look pretty much like the juveniles. All right, here's an adult on the left, a juvenile on the right. But it'd be pretty hard to tell them apart. And I'm no expert, but what I'm looking at on this is I'm still seeing the white dots. And a juvenile would not have those yet. So we're not seeing them on the other. So that's why I'm saying adult and juvenile. Okay, as the adults take off in September, maybe early October, you can see the colors changing, and that juvenile is left on its own, waving to mom and dad, saying, okay, I'll be okay, and I'll get down there by myself. And they are the last ones to migrate, and they find their way on their own. So we also keep track of juvenile success. And you can see from 1996 to 2024, how many of those chicks that have hatched actually survived the summer into the fall, and you can see that. One year, actually, we had in 1998, 100%, 17 out of 17 made it. But you can also see the numbers that we have. I think the most, look at this. We had 40 chicks that year, 49 eggs, and 40 of them hatched. 27 of them made it. And that, so you can see the percentages there as well, which on the average for all of those years, 63.5% of survival rate on this one lake. Well, right when the ice goes on in early or late November, early December, Warren and Arliss can be seen out on the ice again, collecting all the grasses for next spring. And what we can end up doing too, looking at this as a model or as an example of loon management, is just simply ask the same question they asked so many years earlier. What can we do? And that. So we have a few concerns. We'll wrap things up in just a couple of minutes here. Some people would say you're playing with nature. Nature should take its own course. There's some truth to that, but at the same time, if that was the case, would we be seeing bald eagles back now? Until we found out that DDT was one of the problems? Would we have the wood ducks that we have after losing a lot of the natural nest sites with the logging practices and that? All of a sudden we have the artificial nest boxes. That's helped a lot. So loons, we're aware of it, but so far we're seeing that the benefits outweigh the other things. Loon health issues, dealing with natural nesting material. Instead of using the straw and the hay and stuff, we're using the natural. ANPs might be like a flashing beacon for humans. Curiosity, hey, what's over there? We have to pay attention to that. Also, are they recognizable feeding stations for predators? Are we going to start seeing more of that, like with these otters, year after year? Those are concerns we have, and we'll certainly be monitoring all of that. Okay, we have, in part of our outreach, USGS with Kevin Keno's migration study, National Geographic and Smithsonian have visited us. Here's Kevin with part of his team. on collecting and capturing loons and putting leg bands on them, geolocators, and actually having surgery done to implant satellite transmitters into the males with that antenna sticking out like that. Little strange to see a loon with an antenna, but that was part of his study. And here was a juvenile in 2014. They came back, they said, you know, we don't really know much about juveniles. It was always thought that they fly south for the first time in the fall, and they stay in the Gulf or south for 2.5 years before they come back the third spring. They're finding out that that's not always the case either. Here's Carrol Henderson, who is, I can never give Carrol enough praise. With the DNR's Loon restoration project, Carrol did most of the legwork and the writing of all of that to get some of the BP oil spill money from the Gulf to study our loons in Minnesota to see, is it affecting fertility or egg production because of what our loons are feeding on in the Gulf with all the chemicals. And here with Smithsonian coming in 2019 to film, and National Geographic coming 2 different times, 2017 and 2021. When the last time National Geographic was here, it was a filming company out of the UK, over in England. They started calling us almost a year in advance, saying, we're sending a crew, we have to get all this paperwork done. And I said, what paperwork? Oh, they needed all kinds. They said, are you a certified boat captain? We've got the Loon boat, you know, and they wanted to know what kind of boat we used. Well, here was my boat, you know, just a 16.5-foot Alumacraft, but they wanted to know the name of the boat. I suppose they're used to out on the oceans, Susie Q or whatever the names on those boats are. So I had to come up with a name. And again, I didn't use Barry's creativity. I had to use my own creativity. I knew Loon boat was already taken. So I came up with Lunar Rover. And that was acceptable to them. They said, that's fine. So, you know, we were carting them around. They came for 2 weeks. Evidently, the budget was great enough. Prior years when film crews came, they stayed in motels in town. When I talked to them in the UK, I said, I don't know what your budget is, but if you can end up paying for cabins at a resort on the lake, that way they'll be there 24 hours a day, every day. And they can get oh yeah, they did that, no problem. So we let them use, Barry let them use his pontoon boat. We had a smaller boat that they could use. We were carting them around. We had a lot of fun. You know, my photography level is here. It might not be at the ground level, but it's here. Theirs is, and it was so much fun being with them and watching them work. We also have helped 4-H members build the PVC ones, and some schools are doing it. Some scouts are using it as their Eagle Scout project, building PVC rafts and putting them out. We're also, as part of our outreach, I'm writing articles always for newspapers, for magazines. Here was about the Mantrap project in Lake Country Journal, which is a magazine from Brainerd. And then giving presentations too on answering the call to Loon. So I certainly appreciate very much that, that you stayed, you know, you didn't leave. But if there are any questions, we have about 5 to 1. I was told you guys are out of here at 1 o'clock. I really had to cut things down because originally this had 837 slides and we would have been out of here by Friday at noon, you know. Yes, question. Oops.
Data sets that compare platforms with full canopy versus partial versus nothing, as far as
you know, that is one thing that we certainly have to do, but in reference, basically, we've just compared the natural sites to the rafts and that. And as we said, we usually do a progression on the canopies and that, starting with it open and then going from that. But that is, yeah, that'd be a very good thing to add. And I'll look back at our data and see if we can end up coming up with something like that. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah, they float on that, and with the anchor ropes and that, yeah, certainly, they will change, yeah, yeah. So,
Another question.
You showed one swan, you seeing with the comeback of swans and your successful loons interactions at all on lake?
you know, we get several swans and pelicans for the first few weeks after ice out. But no swans are nesting on that lake for whatever reason. We have tons of swans, and again, thanks to Carrol Henderson and that. And so several are on the lake right in May, but usually by Memorial Day, they're gone. And even now, a few weeks ago, even on the ponds that still had ice on it, I was seeing pairs of swans standing out there claiming their territory and that. And we have in Park Rapids, the river stays open on part of it in the wintertime. In this winter, we had probably over 100 swans that never went anyplace. They just stayed there. So, and that's happening on the Ottertail River too, and down by Monticello. If you've ever stopped there on the Mississippi, you know, the lady that used to, she passed away now, but she was feeding swans 1,000 pounds of corn a day. And that, yeah, yeah. So anyway, okay, yes.
Is there a size of lake that has a capacity to it that you've seen, like,
You know, a lot of things that you look at, say, loons need about 100 acres or something like that. What we're seeing on Mantrap again, we have more, like it's about 1,700. We should have 17 nests. But because of the structure of the lake, all the bays and the privately owned undeveloped shoreline, it has room for, I think we're at 24. And there's one bay that every year there's a pair of loons in that bay, and we keep thinking, okay, they've got the whole bay to themselves, and they're not nesting there. So for what reason? I'm not sure. And a few of the nests that we've had for several years, all of a sudden last year, they weren't nesting by Dead Island. They weren't nesting in Hoodoo Bay. So probably one of the male or female died, you know, and there's gonna transition there. So we'll be watching for that. Yeah.
The canopies are obviously eagles, eagles.
Yeah, and well, it could be crows, could be seagulls. Yeah.
But they don't go in the sides because you leave them open. Eagles, they've got to get from above. They won't.
Yeah, well, it's, I'm not saying they couldn't, but they haven't in our observations.
and research and good, great data. So I thought I understood that you place your cellular trail cams on every nest?
Almost every nest. We have, each year we've added a few more cellular cameras. So I think now we have 12 or 14 cellular cameras. And so we still have the old style on some of them. The ones that, you know, there are a few nests where maybe it's because a new male or female, where they seem to be a little more jittery with us. We don't want to be disturbing those nests at all. So there definitely is where we put the cellular cameras.
We installed one, and it had variables. So have you done anything with the live loon?
Well, the very first year in 2008, when I told Lyle I want to start filming this, I had these little Hawkeye nature cams that I put in wood duck boxes so I could film wood ducks in there, but it's a hardwired camera. And so I had a 100-foot cable or 150-foot cable. We mounted the camera on the canopy. I ran the cable down the side of the raft and down the anchor rope to the bottom of the lake, where I put weights on it so it would stay on the bottom instead of floating there. And we thought, that'll be the thing. You know, that's the first thing we tried. The next day when I went out, the first camera I set up wasn't working. I thought, no, what happened? A muskrat chewed off the cable. And so that one was shot. And while I was fixing that one, I had a call from a lady in another part of the lake. She said, Steve, there's something wrong here. I said, what? She said, there's a pelican out here that's flopping. I thought, oh, what did I do now? So I went over, and sure enough, a pelican was right by the loon raft, and it had gone down to get something, and the cable just simply was around the wing. It wasn't wrapped up. But so I went out in a paddle boat with a musky net. And I put the musky net over the pelican and got the cable off. And if you've ever smelled down the throat of a pelican, oh man. But anyway, it wasn't hurt. It went off and the loon was still sitting there watching, you know. But yeah, so we are not using things with a cable anymore at all.
I'm gonna take this opportunity to kind of start to wrap things up, but feel free to come up and ask more questions as before you head out for the rest of your Tuesday. And I would also like to let everyone know that next week we will continue exploring water, but in a different perspective through swimming and how that builds our relationship with water and poetry and literature as well. So I look forward to seeing all of you next week when Lacey will be back. Thank you so much. And thank you, Steve, for sharing all of your knowledge with us today.
Well, thank you. Thank you.